Priya Arora uses they, them pronouns. Priya is a queer, non-binary journalist who is dedicated to lifting up the narratives of underrepresented communities. Priya hosts a podcast called Queering Desi, where they celebrate the stories of South Asian LGBTQIA plus people through a series of interviews. Priya has also covered South Asian entertainment and pop culture for more than 10 years, with bylines at the New York Times, HuffPost, India.com, and more. They currently live in Los Angeles and serve on the board of a South Asian LGBTQIA plus organization called Satrang. And Priya is joined by Reema, their partner, and we welcome them both to the conversation. Welcome.
Thank you so much for having us. Excited to be here and talk with all of you.
Yes. There's so much to cover, first of all. So we're going to jump right into it. We wanted to start our conversation today by talking about identity. So coming out is certainly part of that journey, but in your case, Priya, so has understanding gender. So I'm wondering if you could share more about what coming out has looked like for you.
Yeah, I mean, I say this a lot with Queering Desi, and that's part of the reason I started a podcast like that, which is really the mission of broadening what it means to come out. And I mean, I'm been out for almost a decade or more than that, and it still feels like I come out all the time. I mean, anytime, we all know this, anytime you enter a new space, anytime you're walking on the street, anytime, I mean, anywhere and everywhere, you're straddling that line of, do I come out and do I reveal truths about myself? I think for me, the gender part has been newer in that timeline, just in the sense that in my coming out journey initially, I didn't have the language and the understanding and the learnings around gender that I think society is now mainstream with, in a way that I just wasn't exposed to before that. So I think for me, the idea of moving away from labels, so for me, queer and non-binary, it feels right because it's the least restrictive, if that makes sense to me, at least, of like, I'm just not cis hetero, right? Like that's not what I am, but I'm kind of anything and everything other than that. And so these are labels that fit me, but I also am beyond them in some ways. And I try not to let those restrict me. So with respect to gender, I think an understanding that, you know, gender being a construct, and especially in our communities, those roles and expectations that come with them, I never really fit them, but I didn't have words to describe why I didn't fit them or how I didn't fit them. And so for me, that gender exploration or using they, them pronouns or calling myself non-binary is really about saying, okay, that never fit anyway. I'm outside of that. And so now I have a way to kind of label it, but it's me and that's who I am. And so it's not even just about that label or just those pronouns.
When you said you've come out several times, I can identify with that. I can't identify with the gender identity part, but I can definitely deal with the grappling of like, if I'm in a new environment, you know, how much of myself do I disclose? And then, you know, deal with the situation that may be. But I wanted to touch on something you said about language and labels. So, you know, there may have been a time where you weren't able to match language with how you were feeling. So how important is the power of language in establishing who you are?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think for South Asian communities, especially, with the richness and variety of our languages, it gets so much harder. And I grew up in a very traditional cultural household, growing up with several languages in that region. And I just felt like I didn't, as I described with gender, like didn't have a word for what it was I felt. I mean, so many of us in the community talk about our beginnings of our coming out journeys being a lot about, we thought we were the only one. You know, I talk to people in Satrang all the time who say, you know, we Googled, how did they find Satrang? Is like, they Googled like gay Desi or queer Desi. And that's part of my story too, right? Like you think you're the only one. And so I think language ties into that, because for me, it's not as restrictive or labeling, but as far as saying, there's a tangible quality to this. I know there's something different about me, unique about me. And it's important to be able to place that, because in other ways it's isolating and lonely to just say, well, there's something off and I don't know what it is, right? You need the diagnosis to treat the problem, right? When you talk about a medical thing. So if we're talking about something like identity, which is so fluid and so rich and very like varied, right? Language can be that restrictive, but I think about it as I need to know that there's something tangible about this. Like, it gives me an avenue to explore. I know gender identity is something that for me can evolve, right? But I have the language to say it's this part of me that I need to like explore or learn more about, rather than saying, well, something's off about me and I don't know what that is. And it can be then detrimental to not be able to use language to express that.
So I know that, as you learn more about yourself and kind of make language work for you and how you're feeling, other people are the recipients of that information too. So I'm wondering that, in your journey, in your life experiences, when people have learned perhaps new things about you, or as you're revealing them to other people, how have important relationships in your life been impacted by these decisions or these changes or this identity that you're creating for yourself?
That's a great question. I mean, I think with the closest people, you talked about biological families being important for us. I think that's the most scary part of it. When it comes to gender identity, for me, like that has come in so much more of my recent journey that I haven't had like I'm going to sit down and come out again or talk about this with my family in this way, or what are pronouns. I think it's more of like, this is me. I'm just me. And if you know me as me, that's okay. I don't need to sit down with my parents or my cousins and say, hey, I use they, them pronouns, or that's a choice that I've made, right? So for me, the family part is like, as long as you see me for who I am and I can be open about that part of my life with you, I don't need you to understand the labels, or I don't need you to like be worried about what pronouns to use, whatever they're comfortable with. I keep that very open. I think for me, other places that matters can be work, and then also South Asian spaces. So that does give me a lot more anxiety in the way that, for example, when I started using they, them pronouns, work was kind of my experimentation ground, because I wanted to see how it would feel. I wanted to see if people would respect it. I wanted to know how I would react in a situation where someone misgendered me, and if I was okay with that, or if I, wanted to correct somebody. It was almost this trial ground for me, where there are professional boundaries and things, and people will, put it in their signature. There was a space for me to explore that. So I found that workplace was really helpful for those things. And I think in South Asian spaces, the most, for me, what I feel is that over the years with my more masculine presenting, gender identity, I think it like outs me in a certain way in those spaces anyway. So there's already assumptions being made or things about that kind of come across even without the language part of it. So I oftentimes will gauge how much I can either talk about it, how much I can introduce Reema as my wife, or is it a friend? Is it, like you have to kind of read the safety or the comfort of those situations. So I think those are some examples that I can think of in regards to your question.
Sure. And before we switch it over to Sri, who has another topic to talk about, I wanted to talk about pronouns a little bit more. I've noticed in recent years that I think there's been an effort to normalize or mainstream pronouns in introductions in company environments. I actually work for an LGBTQ plus center, so like that's part of who we are. It's just very organic to what we do. And I know that for parents of LGBTQ plus folks, pronouns have always been like a trip up kind of situation where they're worried about misgendering their child, or it's a learning curve for folks. I'm just wondering about your thoughts about making pronouns part of as normal as a part of introducing our own names. It just comes with the name.
Yeah, I think there's like in any space, but I think in particular with South Asian spaces or with our families, there's an aspect of education that I think, especially in the community wise, like we can educate our parents, our cousins, our immediate family. But as a community, I think South Asians are still not used to that question or like normalizing some of that, right? That's why I mentioned in a workplace where you have a pronoun option in your, in your backend, in your company directory or on Slack you have this kind of normalizing that starts to happen. I think it's great when you're comfortable, like introduce yourself as that. And I try to do that, especially when I'm doing talks or meeting people in kind of a professional or in a networking kind of sense. If you open that door, it pauses someone to think about, oh, well, mine are just she, hers, or maybe they never had to think about it, right? And I think initiation can help with that, but education as well of like, along with introducing your name, instead of asking, what do you do? I guess the second question, what are your pronouns, or where do you live, before where do you live here? And I think if we initiate that, and if our allies are able to initiate those conversations in those spaces, it can start to bring that education of, oh, well, I have the privilege that I never have to think about what my pronouns are. I can volunteer them next time, but maybe that person doesn't even know that that's something they need to think about or put a label to.
I would call that cisgender privilege.
Yes,
I think
very much so.
that's something that I constantly have to remind myself. But thank you so much for sharing that. I want to turn things over to Sri, who has more questions for you.
Priya, thank you for that, because I think as a parent, we are constantly wondering, how to navigate and not say something. And this learning process is so important. And I'm so glad we are having these conversations, because as hard as it is on the child, it's also the parents are wondering, what can we do next? And to me, the next very important thing, seeing the two of you on this tile together, is your marriage. We'd love to hear about how you met each other. Was it a Bollywood type of a meeting?
I kind of. I mean, for me, it was. I fell in love at first sight because I grew up on. I'm wearing a kajal shirt. I grew up on Bollywood. I love it. So we met on Tinder. Reema had no bio, and I had made a rule for myself where I was not going to swipe right on anyone who didn't have a bio, but I broke my rule. And she says that it happened accidentally on her side.
No, I was working at a pharmacy, and I had other coworkers, and they had my phone. Tinder was pretty new for me at that time, being an immigrant and coming out, I had just come out a year ago, and it was all scary territory, and a friend of mine was actually teaching me how to use Tinder and was like, oh, this is how you swipe and stuff. I was like, okay, I don't have time for this. And she was like, okay, I'm just gonna swipe for you and we'll just decide whatever happens. And I didn't know we matched.
I mean, this is the story that I keep hearing.
That's the truth. But yeah, later on we connected, and I think I could say that from that moment, we never stopped talking. Really.
I mean, yeah, the connection was immediate for me. I mean, I still remember what she was wearing. She walked into the restaurant. I mean, it was still, that first date is probably the best first date I've ever been on. We talked for hours. It felt like we had known each other. I mean, and if you talk about Bollywood, I mean, it sounds really cliche, but it felt like, oh, I'm just catching up with an old friend. And we just couldn't stop.
It's super
talking.
cliche, but it was it's like I've been with you for years.
Yeah,
in that moment.
Beautiful. I mean, it also gives a lot of hope to all of us parents wondering what next. How does this, So it's so good, because when we meet for our support group meetings, these are common questions that keep coming up amongst the parents. Okay, what do we do? Do we set up how we are so used to doing these things? But it's great that you have all these wonderful avenues and you met each other. That's beautiful. So what do you like about each other?
Oh man, I mean, now we've been
I'm sure the list is very long.
Marriage changes that question a lot.
Marriage is similar to everyone's marriage. It's the same. After 5-6 years, they're like, it's hard to find what I like about you. No,
I think that for me, I will always say that Reema is the stronger of the two of us. She's a quiet strength, but has she's like a truffle. She's got a soft center, but this hard exterior. So I know and see the pain and the sensitivity, but she doesn't show that a lot. And so she's the strength, right? When I have my crazy Virgo moments, or the journey with my family has been very long. When I have those moments, Reema is the strength. It's there, and the core is getting affected, and she has her emotions, but she's the strength. And she's also the creative one of the two of us. So I'm always envious of her design, her eye for color, her painting. I mean, anything creative, she's great at. Those are some that come to mind for me.
Yeah.
Don't dig too hard if you can.
So is Reema the brainchild behind the wonderful videos you all put out?
110%. I didn't even have to tell you, and you do that, Sri. She is absolutely the TikTok person. I'm the Bollywood person, but she's the TikTok person. She's the dancer. Left brain, right brain situation with us for sure.
Yeah.
Oh, we just love those videos. And I know something very exciting is coming up, and you've been very public about the IVF process. Would you like to share that with all of us? Because that's another very important question, again, as a parent, that you have embarked on this beautiful journey. So please share that with
us. So my mom is on the call. So hi, Mom. I also want to share that for families, this is one of the first questions I got was, well, does this mean you can still have a family? And I know the cultural importance of that. And so I want to start off by saying, like, it's absolutely possible. We have the privilege of access to care and of having things like insurance and family support, both financial and emotional. So it's a long journey, but we have been trying to conceive for almost 2 years now. We knew pretty early on and had discussed wanting kids, but we waited for both of us to kind of be in that place of, yes, we're ready. So this is like pre-COVID. And we've been on a journey. I mean, I'm happy to talk more with anyone who has questions about details, but we found a sperm donor and we've been on this journey for a couple of years. We wanted to have a child that looked like us. So finding a South Asian sperm was very important to us. And I think for me of late, I just went through an IVF round in January, and Reema will be going through one next month as well. And so for me and her, I think the being open part about it has been probably the scariest part, but the most empowering part. I post about it pretty openly on social media, especially when I was going through the cycle, because we had gone through a lot silently for a long time without success. And we started to realize that as we talked to friends in some social situations, other people had experiences, whether they were, cisgender or heterosexual or anything, around fertility in the South Asian community. There's such a taboo, and that taboo meets the taboo of queerness and transness, right? So there's just silence around it. So what I've found and what has really kept me going is from the journey of my IVF a couple months ago, I've now continued to share, because I have people, women or people identify as women reaching out to me across the spectrum saying, wow, thank you for saying this, because we've been doing X, Y, and Z. And they did it silently, right? I mean, there are so many generations of queer folks who have done this before us. I keep saying, like, we're not reinventing the wheel here. But I think that we have the privilege of saying, we have something like social media, we have this platform, we have the words for this. We can now share this in a way that, like, we had to seek that community silently and found them. And that's been an important part of our process. But sharing it publicly has been great, because we're now finding new people reaching out to us. Even I have straight friends who have been, I froze my eggs, or now I'm going to go get my fertility checked. Like, just those small things for South Asian women, especially, like, we're not talking about, hey, bacha ho jayega. When God wants, you'll have the kid, right? We're not talking about the process or the emotional toll that it can take. I mean, you can add it as well, but
No, I completely agree with what you're saying. And I think fertility journey overall for anyone is difficult these days. And when we go into these spaces, we're still in the minority of like a queer couple sitting in a clinic, but a majority of the people are still straight people waiting with their, husbands or anything like that. So it does get a little like confusing sometimes. So for people who are like same-sex couple who are using a specific clinic, you kind of have to still voice out your presence there, because there's always this thing of like, no, Priya's my partner. If Priya is having an IVF and I'm having an IUI, we're still partners. If her sperm, the sperm is coming into the clinic and there's 2 vials, one is for me, one, like, these are small things that I guess people will overlook because you're a same-sex couple. They will get confused about it, and you just kind of have to make yourself kind of known in that position, which has been one of my experiences. But some people have different journeys. Everyone has very different journeys, but mostly it's the way you get treated in that journey and the kind of support. For us, we're very lucky that, we have had family support. It took a while, but, they're all around. They ask, and that's what matters. Someone asking, how's it going? How can we support you?
Yeah. And like I said, finding the community. There have been so many folks, both within the queer community, but just the South Asian community at large, who have reached out to us. So it feels like we're not alone. I'm not just saying, oh, this is our journey and this is what we've been through. It's really all of our journey. And for queer folks, especially, to know that this is possible. I have friends who are queer, who have children, and now I know it's possible. And so if I can help carry that torch forward, that's kind of my purpose and my intent with sharing that journey too.
Yeah, and I think we've made some mistakes as well in the starting when we didn't know that's why it's so important to talk about it, because sharing of that opinion can help us like avoid those mistakes for other people.
Absolutely. And we wish you the best on this beautiful journey. And I'm sure I'm sure we'll have many, many questions. And both as parents as well as couples going through this, I think a very relevant topic. And I'm so glad you're sharing that on the social media so that, tomorrow nobody hesitates to reach out and ask rather than kind of trying to figure it out alone and being, apprehensive about the do's and the don'ts. Thank you for
and
that.
I think, I always talk about paying it forward. I admire so many of my role models of generations before me who had that journey and who had those challenges and lived in a time when they couldn't talk about it, even more than we feel like we couldn't now, right? They didn't have the tools we have. They didn't have the privilege of saying, hey, I can talk about what it was like to find a sperm donor, right? Like, I feel like we're carrying that forward because we didn't know it was possible. And there are folks who have done that and they didn't get a chance to share their stories, right? So I think of myself as like a vessel of like, I'm carrying forth so many people's journeys because it's not just about us. All of our communities have faced this. We've just not had the chance to talk about it.
Thank you for that. And Stephen, over to you.
Yeah, I just wanted to chime in really quickly. I think the visibility and the education of what you're doing is so important to future parents like myself. I cannot wait to become a dad and to see, fabulous queer parents just like talking about their journey is so inspiring and needed. So you definitely are carrying the torch to even folks that you might not even anticipate being the recipients of that message. So thank you for that.
Yeah, and I wanted to share, sorry, quickly for all the parents on the call, like family is possible. It may not look the way that you might have thought or imagined, but family can take so many forms and all of that. Family is possible. So if your child wants a family or desires that, there's infinite possibilities of making that happen. So just keep that faith.
I'm going to record what you said and send it to my mother.
Yes, please.
I'll be like, they said it. Okay, so I wanted to switch our conversation over to your professional life and something that we actually have in common, which is journalism. So it's not one of those careers that basic parents imagine for their kids, most likely. I know my dad certainly was like, what? So I'm wondering if you could talk about why journalism resonates with you.
Yeah, it's so funny that I ended up in journalism. I actually was studying to become a therapist. So psychology kind of always spoke to me. I think so many of us in the communities have had journeys with mental health. So there was something about that field that spoke to me. But in the duration of my studies, I became very fascinated with and attached to narratives and storytelling. And I was writing and editing on the side anyway. But like you said, I never deemed it a career. It was more of a hobby or something I did for fun. So when I got the chance after I finished grad school to either choose, journalism or stay on the path of psychology, I chose journalism. And I've always had that kind of tie into narratives and storytelling. And that's why in my bio, I include like underrepresented, right? Even at any publication that I've worked at, I'm always pushing for who are we not telling their story, right? And so for me, whether that's writing about South Asian pop culture or anything like that, it's really about the narratives, the story. I believe strongly that the story we tell ourselves about ourselves is the strongest story, right? And we can change that. We have the power to change that. So that storytelling is the core, right? That attachment of if I'm meeting you, Stephen, like, what is your story? I want to know your story because it tells me something about who you are. And even the way you might tell it, right, is going to tell me about who you are. So that storytelling is the core of it. I've had many titles and many roles across the years, but that's kind of what brings me back to journalism every time.
Oh, that just touched my heart in so many ways because that's kind of how I ended up in journalism too. I wrote like sing-songy poems growing up, and writing was in like my blood. But I think transforming it into a career of not only storytelling, but essentially truth seeking was something that really resonated with me. And now that I'm out of journalism, I still want to tell those stories. So the narrative, especially with underrepresented communities, is something that I can relate to as well.
Yeah.
But I also know that in addition to, your primary work, you also have this fun outlet with this podcast called Queering Desi. And I'm wondering if you can talk about that and how that's a departure from journalism for you.
Yeah. So for me, I mean, I've been part of the South Asian activist community for many years in New York. I was part of Salga, and, being on the board and being involved in that is wonderful and so necessary for our communities, but it burned me out. It really, really burned me out. So this is when Reema and I had first moved in together, and I had been talking to her about, well, I want to stay connected to the community. I was done kind of doing the activisty, I'm going to protest, but I wanted to do something within the community. And I'd made all these connections through all of the work that had been done. And she was like, why don't you record a podcast? Like, it was just like, hey, what about, and podcasts were seeing a resurgence at that time in 2018. So I literally asked a friend at work who also had a podcast, very cliche, who said, I was like, what mics and stuff do you buy? Like, how do you do this? And so he gave me like Amazon links, and I just started recording in my living room. In our closet at various times too. Literally just calling up friends of mine who I had met over the years. Arora was one of my first guests as well. Several folks across the South Asian queer community, just to talk about exactly what you talk about with Proud Possibilities, right? Like, what does it mean to be a South Asian queer person, and something beyond that, right? So you might have this in common, and that might connect us and give me a relatability to you off the bat. But what does it mean to be a chef or an actor or director or, a parent of a queer person? Like, having these different perspectives and capturing those, I think, for me, it's fascinating. And Stephen, you might relate to this as a journalist, capturing that in someone's own words. So like I said, the story we tell ourselves about ourselves. A writer might write a story about you and use a quote and build a narrative and pull all the strings together. But what if you tell your story your way? And so to capture that almost in an oral history way was really enticing for me. And so I'm just lucky that it's grown to 3 seasons. I'm really hoping to bring about for a 4th this season, hopefully with some video as well. But really, really just, we went to London in 2019. I recorded out there, met so many people, in the UK as well. So just finding these little outlets of our communities and these little histories of what is it like to just like live your life as a South Asian queer person and beyond that.
Also, it kind of captures a time and a moment in that audio, right? Because a lot of people recently, older guests, have come back and said, I listened to it again, and I'm like realizing where I used to be, where I am today. And it marks like the journey from there onwards. There's still so much more to cover.
Yes, absolutely.
I think that your project is actually very archival, and it's like very, it preserves history in a way. So as Reema was saying, like, people can revisit it and be like, oh, I'm at a different point in my life where so many things have happened since that conversation. COVID has certainly changed life. So I think in addition to it being fun and informative, it actually has a very deep purpose in preserving, especially South Asian history and storytelling. So thank you for that. I wanted to switch things over to Sri, who has some more topics for you.
Yeah.
And I know we have your mom here.
Yes.
So we would love to hear from her because this is so special. And as a mother, I'm sure we can all relate to what mom has to say.
Yes, absolutely. Let me just double check with her.
Sure.
Yeah.
And Reema, while that is happening, I know we've been watching a lot of movies these days. Bollywood is trying to take these topics and represent their version. How do you feel about that? What are your thoughts? And whenever mom is ready, we are ready too. So.
Well, when it comes to especially, all these Bollywood movies, I will say there's content, like comparison to other beliefs. I have a very different opinion. We have a very different opinion. A lot of people say that it's not doing justice. I I think of it the other way. I think it's a step forward. I mean, we have to look at where we're coming from. It was really backwards. So we're making few steps. I know it's going to take a few times to get it right as representation in Bollywood, at least. But I also feel like we need to step up more. I feel like we should not just sit there saying, oh, this is not represent right. Let's do something about it. As a community, let's go to those avenues. These people are available, writers and directors. They're open to listening to the queer perspective for their movies, but they don't have anyone to approach. Let's make our names out there. Let's present our stories. Let's tell them how to actually, depict us in a story like narrative. And I also feel like we have to have a little more of artists in that realm also, right? One thing that I always tell Priya that annoys me is like when in Bollywood someone's portraying a queer role and that person is not queer. I mean, we're so many. We should step up and we should try to get to that place, right? And definitely try. And I feel like, yeah, at that point when these movies are coming out, I do wish there's more queer actors playing those roles.
Yeah, I think I agree. I think, Bollywood has come a long way. I think there's a difference between Bollywood, traditionally as we've known it, and the streaming world. I mean, I've written about this and it's fascinating to me because I think that's the divergence we're seeing. You have the mainstream Bollywood and then you have other what used to be maybe indie or other depictions, which are now becoming more accessible, hopefully, to people on streaming platforms. So while there are queer artists and actors and all the things that Reema has been saying, maybe they didn't have the avenues or the chances to do that. And so I think there is a sense that this is a community that's been ignored for a long time or made fun of for a long time, and we need to kind of represent that. I appreciate, more appreciate depictions that kind of consult with the community, and you can tell the difference when that's the case and when it's not. So I think there are several films that have had at least a script, like a advisor, someone weighing in, or even a screenwriter or someone, weighing in on the script directly, or is it just a straight person writing the story? So I think there's a difference between capitalizing on queer stories and also just trying to tell them authentically. And I think the latter is kind of what's happening, I hope. So we just saw a few on Netflix, and I think it's getting there. I hope that we can again move beyond the coming out portion of that, but I understand the importance of family acceptance and showing that journey as well. So I think we can't skip that either, right? We have to go through that process of, well, there are queer people. Okay, here are their stories. Okay, here's how they come out. And then maybe we'll just be, oh, it's just, you're just a lawyer someday, or you're just an activist. And like, that's just your queerness and your chances is part of your character. So we'll get there too. I think it's definitely getting better.
Yeah, like you said, small steps definitely makes a big difference. Yeah. And also, I think your podcast, I think that's probably another excellent way to maybe even for the writers to reach out, because like you said, they are wondering who to talk to, so that they do it the right way. So for sure. And over to you, Stephen, and whenever mom is ready, we would love to.
Reema's gonna go grab. We're actually at my parents' house this weekend, so
perfect.
Yeah, just kind of going off that conversation, Priya, I'm just curious about what representation you saw when you were growing up. Like maybe it's similar to me, but in the media and in your personal life, did you know other queer Desis growing up? Did you see, what did you connect with, if at all, when you were watching and seeing things?
Oh man, nothing. I mean, nothing. I remember 90s Bollywood movies that had either a gay friend in the hero's gang that was like really effeminate and let's make fun of them. There was also a movie, I think it was Pyar Kiya to Darna Kya, it was a Salman movie that had kind of like a woman who was like a little dykey or a little like masculine, right? And you had that kind of, again, a comedic. So you saw queerness, but it was always adjacent. It was never labeled, and it was always the butt of the joke. And so, and that was before I had any notion that I had any identity in this realm. But it was now revisiting those things, you're like, whoa, I can't even, that's all we had, right? There was no like explanation of why do I feel this way? I think, as I came out, there was a lot of fixation on people like Karan Johar. I mean, people, in the Indian community that I grew up with, of like, is this person queer? Why aren't they out? You know, it would help be a role model. And I don't think it's personally, my take is that I don't think it's our place to like judge anyone for their outness. Like I have no qualms with Karan Johar, like personally, like he doesn't have to come out to me. I'm cool with it. But yes, I can say like having those tangible examples would really help. I think for my family, when I came out, it's a genuine question. And maybe a lot of you have this of do we know anyone else like this? You know, and not in a sense of like, oh, I want to out this person. Maybe they're already out, but like, do I just know anyone in the community? And I think that's where Queering Desi Rainbow parents, things like this that exist now that didn't exist then are so important because we need those examples. We don't have them and they're still very hard to come by. So I definitely think now having that visibility is huge, but yeah, I didn't have it growing up. And the Badai though, I don't know if anyone's seen this on Netflix yet, but there was a scene of a pride march. I won't spoil anything. And it made me cry because I grew up watching Bollywood. If I had ever even seen a rainbow flag, what a difference it could have made for my own journey, right? So I'm glad it's happening now. It just looks a lot different, yeah.
Yeah, I think if I saw that too, I would also get teary-eyed because visibility is so important. And while we didn't have it while we were growing up, the fact that it's happening now, and not just in Bollywood, but even on social media, like in TikTok, like the videos that you and Reema are making, it's just so, the visibility is so important. And also organizations like Desi Rainbow are super important as well.
I do want to mention, Stephen, my mom is available now. If you
if there's anything you want to ask her. So Priya's mom is on the call. Priya's mom, we would love to give you a couple minutes to share what's on your heart.
Thank you so much. I have been listening to this and I am so deeply moved by everybody's involvement. I thought my daughter is a brilliant gem, but you all are precious gems. I feel like I'm the richest person today. I am in the diamond mine, and meeting all of you is a tremendous matter of pride for me. I give all the credit to my understanding of this absolutely new topic or new life or whatever you call it to Priya. She explained things, she was open. It takes courage. It takes courage like I've never seen before. It takes courage to the point that I never imagined is possible humanly. As humans, we're very limited. And what made it more beautiful is Reema. She completes my family. I have 2 daughters that I can't live without. That's me. And I give them all the credit. I love them to death. And I love you all for what you're doing, what you're contributing. I don't think you know the magnitude of it. Nobody does. So
can I ask you one question? This is a lot of families and parents. Can you just, everyone's journey is different, but any words of anything that has helped you on your journey, any advice? I mean, again, it's everyone's journey is different, but just a few words if you can share for the parents on the call as well.
Thank you. We need to take our child as our child. Parents' love is unconditional. We cannot forget that. They don't have to reach our expectations because our expectations are limiting them. But open-minded is limited word itself. We don't know what that means till we are actually open-minded. Just a reminder and my humble request to every parent, our love is unconditional. Let that love grow and multiply with your child and their spouse, and you will find there is no limit to it. Thank you.
I have a quick question. Thank you so much for sharing that. There are a lot of parents who keep asking, what are some of the things we can do to show our support? And I know you being here with us today speaks a lot about how you've been so supportive, but anything that you can share, because often as parents, we wonder, are we doing everything right by these kids? Anything that you would like to share?
Thank you. As parents, we always doubt ourselves. We know we want to do the best for our kids, but then we can be the worst for our kids also. my only 2 cents, thank you for asking that, is listen to them. Give them all your ears and all your heart. Love has never gone wrong. It cannot go wrong.
Thank you. Thank you. Definitely, that means a lot. And yeah, I'm sure there are a lot of questions too that our audience would love to ask. So if anybody have any questions, you can post it on the chat or feel free to unmute and ask, because this is an excellent opportunity to learn